Hi folks, you read the title right. I meant for it to get your attention, and I do mean it. The intellectual dark web has no balls. I don't usually like to get so polemical, but I have treated these people with kid gloves for too long, and I don't have the patience for it anymore. No matter how accurately I portray the views of Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, and Ben Shapiro, most of their snowflake fans will accuse me of strawmanning. I know this because in my videos about these intellectual dark web grifters, I took great care to accurately present their views. Some Peterson and Harris fans appreciated this kind of fair criticism and told me so, yet I still got people accusing me of taking them out of context or not understanding their work. So if I'm going to hear that anyway, I'm done giving a fuck whether or not these people get too triggered to continue listening. This does not mean I will say anything dishonest. As a matter of fact, dealing with them honestly is what I think gives me the credibility to criticize them so harshly. I'm just not going to worry about upsetting the very delicate boys who start crying in my comments when I tell them their daddy is not as great as they think. Because at this point, I think anyone who still thinks highly of these folks won't be convinced by an argument. They have some daddy issues they need to resolve, and I can't help with that. They need professional help, and listening to a lecture by psychologist Jordan Peterson is no substitute for this. Okay, now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about the intellectual dark web. Though these people claim to want to debate ideas openly, they balk whenever a real challenge appears. I will talk about the three people in particular who do this: Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, and the one person from the intellectual dark web I actually kind of enjoy, Joe Rogan. Yes, Joe Rogan, the guy who likes hunting, martial arts, the terror that comes from getting on stage to do stand-up comedy, and doses of psychedelic drugs that would scare the shit out of most people who are not, well, me, I guess. In all those areas, he is undeniably brave, but that's not the case when it comes to talking with anyone who has too harshly criticized his intellectual daddy, Sam Harris. Prove me wrong, Joe. Prove me wrong. I realize saying they have no balls might offend some people, from their fans to some of those so-called social justice warrior snowflakes that they like to cry about so much. Having witnessed the natural birth of both of my children, I myself am one of those people who thinks that pussies are much tougher than balls, and that saying someone has no balls is perhaps not the best way to say they need to toughen up. In which case, I should use another way of calling them cowards. So I will go with a more old-fashioned way of saying it that won't offend the more sensitive liberals or lefties, and will probably appeal to traditionalists like Peterson.
Yeah! You haven't got the guts!
What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken?
I will start with Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, who claim they want to debate socialists and Marxists, but always chicken out or make some lame excuse for why they can't. Despite their macho posturing on the subject. Okay, despite Peterson's macho posturing on the subject, nobody would ever accuse Ben Shapiro of being macho. So let's start with Shapiro. I just want to say how vile I find Ben Shapiro. I can't think of a more disgustingly popular proponent of racism and nastiness than Ben Shapiro. From where I stand, it looks like Ben Shapiro thinks if he spews enough bile out into the world, that someday the Green Fairy will make him into a real boy. I find him just as noxious as white supremacist Richard Spencer. But unlike Spencer, he has a much wider reach, and unlike Spencer, the ethnically cleansing ethno-state that Shapiro advocates actually exists. Though if ICE keeps it up, that might change. But I digress. Last month, Shapiro made a big show of his offer to debate Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in exchange for a $10,000 donation to her campaign. Let's put aside the fact that this kind of exchange would be a flagrant violation of campaign finance law, and that someone who prides himself on possessing all the facts should know better than to offer to do something so flagrantly illegal in public. In any case, AOC had the perfect response to the offer. And Shapiro, in what seems like an effort to prove her point, replied to it in a way that demonstrated exactly the kind of bad faith discourse she expected. AOC said that the offer was like catcalling because the man making the offer had bad intentions. Shapiro then went on about how he has never catcalled a woman when AOC had in no way accused him of catcalling, but had in fact compared the nasty motives of Shapiro's offer to the motives of the offers coming from catcalling men. Now, at this point, Shapiro supporters might say, yeah, but she still will not debate him. To which I say, she has nothing to gain from debating him. It would make sense for her to debate another elected official, but debating a person who just wants to use sleazy debate tactics like Gish Gallop, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Anyway, look it up. And try for some gotchas based on made-up stats and statements he pulled out of his ass is a waste of time and creates no meaningful dialogue, only a bunch of video clips for Shapiro to share on YouTube. If you still think she should accept the challenge, I would say that you should turn that critical gaze back on Shapiro. Nathan J. Robinson, the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine, wrote a lengthy piece critical of Shapiro and offered to debate him. Shapiro has responded to neither. Brianna Joy Gray of Current Affairs and The Intercept has also offered to debate him, as has Maximilian Alvarez of The Baffler. Again, the person who claims the left can't debate their ideas won't debate leftists who offer.
What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken?
Jordan Peterson is the biggest coward when it comes to debating socialists. For this section, I will turn to a clip from a Zero Books video where Doug Lane discusses his attempts to get Peterson to talk with him.
As much as they claim to champion free speech and rigorous debate, they have set up barricades against their critics. For instance, when Jordan Peterson visited Seattle, he neither signed his books nor took unscreened questions from the audience. I was disappointed, as I'd made the trek from Portland specifically to ask him a question. In December of last year, I scheduled a time to interview Peterson on the podcast for Zero Books. His publicist scheduled a time for a debate, but subsequently canceled. After this, Peterson appeared on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Have you ever debated a Marxist supporter? Have you ever debated someone who is pro-equality of outcome?
No, they don't debate me. No, I haven't, because people don't do it. They don't ask me to do it.
Will Peterson, or anyone from the intellectual dark web, attempt to live up to their rhetoric about free speech? I doubt it. It's up to us on the neo-Marxist left to press on without them.
I can't think of a more cordial interviewer than Lane. I have heard him have a literal struggle session with people who come very close to the leftist caricature that Peterson likes to complain about. The entire time, Lane remained incredibly composed and polite, despite the fact that his guests were being completely unfair to him. As much as I may strive for this kind of patience, I don't think I could have kept my cool as well as Lane. Peterson, if you're afraid to talk with Doug Lane, then... For all my criticisms of Jordan Peterson, I used to find him sincere and thought that was part of his appeal. But after seeing the way he dodged this interview and keeps himself in a bubble, I can't even say that about him. When he does venture out of the safe space of the intellectual dark web, he chooses his opponents very carefully. He talks to people he knows will play the role of outraged liberal, which makes him look more reasonable.
What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken?
Finally, I come to Joe Rogan. This one kind of hurts, because as I said earlier, unlike the other intellectual dark web folks, I actually kind of like Joe Rogan. I find him funny and personable, and although it has been a while since I listened to his podcast regularly, I used to really enjoy it. He sometimes has great guests, and I like his informal conversational style. He is like the male Oprah.
I found this knot in my nose that was bigger than his gum the other day. I had to take the gum out to eat it. Anyway.
You ate a booger?
Oh, it was so long. It was like a Coke book. I got a flashback from the 80s.
Stop.
I inhaled that motherfucker anyway.
Why did you eat a booger?
Because I love him.
Ew!
I love them. From time to time, I have a little pimple.
No,
in my
no,
nose,
no,
and I squeeze it, and it just comes out like a
no,
stream.
no,
and it's got like a little clam.
Dude,
It's like
I
a
was on
clam.
board with you with all the Stephen A. talking and shit.
Anyway,
You really
dog,
eat boogers?
Listen, from time to time.
Oh, Jesus
When you do
Christ.
coke for 30 years, it's a habit. You wake up in the morning, pick one out. It's like a
Why
fucking
would
candy
you-
cane with coke on it. You inhale that motherfucker. It's like going to the dentist for free.
He has an unhealthy attachment to Sam Harris to the point where he is very reluctant to have someone on his program who has criticized Harris. I will let racist comedian, intellectual dark web reject, and man who is having a sustained nervous breakdown, Owen Benjamin, handle this one. Because even a broken clock is right twice a day, even if that clock spends the rest of the day saying the N-word and screaming and complaining about being censored by the PC police for doing so.
Do this, we won't hang out with you. Oh, and never make fun of Sam Harris because he's our atheist Jesus. Sam's their leader, by the way. Just know that. He's the guy that they all get scared of. Sam fucking Big Ears Harris. His mom invented Golden Girls. He's a rich kid from LA. He was born with a silver spoon in his dick hole. Golden Girls, you know how much money that is? You know how much money he was raised with? That's why he could sit for 20 days in a goddamn no talking retreat in the woods. You wanna know why? Because the fucker has a trust fund.
Now, I made a very similar observation in my video on Sam Harris. I was certainly not the first person to point out that Harris comes from privilege. What I find interesting in this clip is that Benjamin voices something that I think a lot of people have noticed. Rogan has an unhealthy veneration for Sam Harris. I find the veneration that Rogan has for Harris very strange because however much I might disagree with Rogan on a variety of topics, I have a lot more respect for Rogan than I do for Harris. My biggest gripe with Rogan is that he is not intellectually rigorous enough to see past Harris or some of the alt-light guests he has on. But he does not claim to be an intellectual, so when he gets taken by one of these grifters, I find it far less of a problem than when a man like Harris, whose brand is, "I'm really smart," has Charles Murray on his podcast, without making any attempt to counter a set of ideas that were chopped to pieces decades ago. Though I will come back to Rogan's platforming problem in a minute. The thing that seems especially strange about Joe's love for Sam is that, unlike Harris, Rogan made it to where he is on his own steam. Perhaps he got a lucky break here and there, but for the most part, he worked his way up as a comedian, MMA commentator, and podcaster. He has a crazy amount of discipline that brought him from his working class background to where he is today. Whereas Harris did not have the discipline to hack it in academic philosophy, so he published his ideas for a popular audience, perhaps knowing, perhaps not knowing, they would never pass peer review as they show a lack of understanding the basics of philosophy needed to discuss the subjects he writes about. For more on this, you can check out my video on Harris or the Cuck Philosophy review of The Moral Landscape. As others have pointed out, Harris basically had his mom buy his neuroscience degree. And by that, I don't mean she paid his tuition. I mean she gave a large monetary gift to the university in exchange for him doing very little work to actually earn his degree. Harris left the research to assistants and has not contributed or even worked in the field since getting his degree. It seems he obtained the degree solely so people could introduce him as Sam Harris, the neuroscientist. Sounds smart, doesn't it? Rogan also has a way more agreeable personality than Harris, who simply can't deal with any kind of criticism without completely losing it on the person criticizing him. That he lets Harris cuck him by turning him off to anyone who might criticize the atheist guru is rather pathetic. But why do I care, besides the fact that I find this relationship kind of lame? I care because this influences the guests that appear on the Joe Rogan Experience. It is very hard to get on the podcast if you have criticized Harris, and this bars a lot of guests that I would love for the Rogan demographic to hear. Because most intelligent people don't take Harris very seriously as an intellectual. Rogan has a platform that reaches millions of people. He is on a lot of very shady alt-light characters that spread some straight-up garbage and poison. He responded to this criticism by having more left-leaning voices on. He had Abby Martin on again, Kyle from Secular Talk, and Jimmy Dore. But despite the fact that he has a following equivalent to Jimmy Dore's and runs a much more serious show, Rogan has not had on Sam Seder of The Majority Report or his co-host Michael Brooks, who has his own awesome show, despite Sam's efforts to get on the show. There is a rising democratic socialist tide, which Seder and especially Brooks advocate for incredibly well, and they do so in the same YouTube podcast media environment that Rogan and many of his guests inhabit. So I think Rogan is overdue to have one or both of them on his podcast. Rogan has had on people with smaller followings and with much more marginal ideas. Frankly, after promoting so many right-wing cranks, he has a responsibility to promote more sane and informed voices to counter them. He also has a responsibility to think more carefully about the ideas he has promoted in the past and try not to promote the same nonsense in the future. Yes, a responsibility. When you have a platform with the kind of reach his does, you need to be more careful about what kind of voices you amplify. I know that nobody would call Rogan an intellectual, but I like to think with a little guidance he is bright enough to filter these clowns out, and a good step towards doing this would be to start listening to people like Michael Brooks and Sam Seder. I was hesitant to include Rogan in this video, but while I was making it, it came to my attention that Rogan was spreading the South African white genocide myth on his program. To his credit, after getting called on it, he has looked into the issue more and shared an article on his Twitter from a leftist source that gave a more accurate appraisal of the situation. So with the right influences, perhaps Rogan could shift away from promoting these fools. I don't know if a day will come when Joe goes on a rant about the need for some democratic socialist reforms, followed by him asking Jamie to pull up some strange video of, monkeys fucking or something. I don't know. But I can dream. So that's it for this video, folks. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you really like what I do, please contribute to my Patreon or make a PayPal donation. I also have some t-shirts for sale. They feature the major arcana of the Marseille Tarot deck that you find decorating my channel. For this video, I have used the Chariot. I have links in the description. I'm Greg Belvedere. Remember, all generalizations are stupid, so never speak in absolutes. See you next time.